Hi, good night. This is the last video of my question and health. I thought the last video was literally the last one, but no, wasn't it? So this week we got three readings, and the main points of these ones struck me is that migrant workers' poor health is not an accident and not individual choice. It is the predictable result of how our food systems, labor markets, and immigration policies are organized. In fresh fruit, broken bodies, home shows destroy the lives of tricky farm workers who migrate from Oaxaca to the United States. And he describes how border militarization racialized labor hierarchies on farms and degrading housing and cleaning cultures literally get under the skin and into the bones of workers, producing chronic pain, injuries, stress, and illness. So the key idea is structural violence, social, economic, and political structures that systematically harm certain groups while benefiting others. So, like the consumers who enjoy cheap, healthy strawberries. And this chapter on occupational health and safety of migrant workers adds another layer. She shows how migrants are concentrated in 3D jobs: dirty, dangerous, and difficult in agriculture, construction, domestic work, and low-paid services, often with precarious contracts and limited protections and weaker enforcement of safety laws. Sorry, and because we have to be honest, if you're a migrant, what another job you can get? Don't you have a title of the school or university, right? So it's so difficult for the people that migrate to the other country, and they show that migrant workers worldwide are overrepresented in hazardous sectors, have higher rates of occupational injuries and fatalities, and face environmental exposures, and such as extreme heat, pesticides, and toxic chemicals, and often without adequate training or protective equipment. And for me, the single overreaching concept is migrant workers' bodies are used as a disposable resource to sustain the health and economies for others. That's the reality, the sad reality. The authors emphasize this because it challenges a very comfortable narrative. Mm, that migrants freely choose risky work and that if they get sick, it is due to individual behavior. Instead, the ratings force us to see how our own societies, policies, and even diets are implicated in their suffering. And something complicated or confused to understand for me, and how we are supposed to act on this knowledge as a future health professionals without falling into paternalism or helplessness. Holmes calls for programming solidarity, meaning concrete actions alongside migrants rather than just feeling empathy. But in practice, we're the line between being an ally and overstepping, especially when there are structural problems like trade agreement or immigration law are so hard. And Reid's discussion of legal foreign workers also raised question for me. She describes very different systems such as the kafala sponsorship system in Gulf countries and exemptions from OSHA regulations for small farms and Estados Unidos. And what I found confusing is how these lawyers of law interact in real life. For example, when a worker is both a temporary visa holder and employed through a labor contractor, and on a small farm exempt from many regulations, which law actually protects them? And many example, it feels like every lawyer reaches protection rather than added it. But I would like to see more concrete case stories of how complaints or injuries actually move or don't move, maybe through legal channels. So, in summary, my gaps are less about basic comprehension, and more about operationalizing the insights. I will need to study specific legal cases, community health interventions, and policy evaluations to see which strategies reproducing power um, strategies producing imbalances. That's the word imbalances, because actually work and how health professionals can participate in this. um, what what was a new idea that I got from this, and how I think, um, I could say it before these readings. I already knew that migrant workers face two conditions, but I tended to think about it mostly as occupational risk. Now I see it much more as a moral architecture built into our everyday lives. Because Ptolemy's graphic descriptions changed my perspective the most when he writes about crossing the desert and tricky migrants sleeping under garbage bags in a hole, hiding from helicopters, being detained and humiliated. He connects that suffering directly to the demand for cheap fruit in United States supermarkets. And it made me realize that healthy lifestyle advice, like eat fresh fruit and vegetables, is not natural. It is abusing the bodies of people whose own health is systematically sacrificed. Um, so, Reid's idea of precarious work and precarious status, and I'm trying to find the right words. Also shifts how I interpret clinical encounters. A patient's irregular legal situation or unstable contract, it is not just social detail. It is a health determinant as important as blood pressure. The fear of deportation or job loss can silence people from reporting injuries or seeking care, which in turn increases morbidity and mortality. This is impressionant. I can't even imagine the stress of the people. And the main change in my thinking is this: no longer see migrant worker health as a niche issue. It is central to understand public health for systems and even how we define a healthy society. And what would I like to explore more and why? I would like to go deeper into interventions that actually reduce harm while larger structural changes are still pending. It is one thing to critique NAFTA border militarization or the kafala system. It is another to identify realistic actions that can be implemented into the short to medium term. For example, Ray describes how temporary migrants or undocumented workers are often thoroughly dependent on employers for housing, transportation, and even access to complaint mechanisms. And I would like to explore models where unions, yeah, onions is another thing, sorry. So, and JLs or community health workers act as an independent support network offering anonymous reporting, legal advice, and health education in migrants or languages. How effective are these models? What are the barriers? That's the question. Um, I would like to explore the intersection between clinical practice, labor rights, and policy advocacy, especially in cities like Mexico and the United States, where migration flows are intense and ongoing, and a personal professional experience connects to these readings. And I once spent time in a community clinic that serves agricultural workers in northern Mexico, and many patients were migrants from southern states who move seasonally for the harvest. And I remember one patient in particular, a man in his 30s, who came with me in severe back pain and numbness in his hands. And he had been working long hours picking tomatoes and paid by the box. And he told us almost apologetically that he could not afford to do rest because if I slow down, I don't eat. He was living with several other workers in a crowded room provided by a contractor with no formal contract or health insurance. All the time, as his case as a typical example of work-related musculoskeletal pain after reading Holmes and now understand his situation as an embodiment of structural violence. Economic policies and labor arrangements can prison his body until it breaks. And in America, system that can only offer painkillers and vague bites to avoid heavy lifting. So, mm, this is impressionant. He wasn't compliant, and he was making a rational decision within an irrational system. This realization pushes me to think differently about how I will talk to similar patients in the future, taking their economic reality seriously and, when possible, connecting them to legal or social support, not just a medical treatment. So that's my professional or personal experience. In general conclusion, this really collective forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our health system, food systems, and migration regimes are deeply interconnected, and migrant workers often pay the highest price. I can imagine if I were one of the ultimately caring for migrant workers. Health is not a favor we offer them. It is a test of how just and human our societies and our health professions really are. We have to be honest. Without them, um, such of things that actually we consume, um, we can reach everyone of us. Um, oh my god, the might mean documenting occupational injuries, carefully advocating for safe working conditions, partnering with community organizations, and reflecting clearly on how my own society benefits from migrant labor. I can say that I'm grateful with them and for my teacher for to um, makes us to read this and know the reality. So thank you so much for watch this video and the reading, and it was a pleasure for me to understand, to know this is something that I will remember all the time and got on my mind for to help the people when I got the opportunity. So I hope you practice too, and thank you so much for watching.